we should start probably. And, Dustin, do you want to start with the front end first and give them an overview of the repos? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Can enable screen sharing.
Yeah, I just enabled it.
Cool. All right, so just feel free to stop me if there's any questions. Kind of just doing this ad hoc. Or everybody see that? Is that okay?
Yes, all good.
Okay. All right, so Marc, do you think I should pull did you push to next migration, like getting rid of sagas?
Yeah, I have most of it except the content editor part. That one I still have locally.
Okay, well, we could just work around it.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Marc, just one more comment, just to give you some more context. Everybody has the repos installed locally on their system, and it's working right now. Okay, so they know the repos and stuff, so we are skipping that part. Okay, yeah.
Cool. Okay, so first thing I'll do is go through the package JSON that we have. So for those of you who haven't used Node.js or NPM or any sort of front end, you don't have really a lot of experience with front end, this is kind of listing the external dependencies that we use in the project. So each of these have their own documentation and their own implementations that we need to worry about. So right now we're using Material UI for our styling. These are all testing libraries, a couple of front end things. For fetching stuff from the back end via API, we're using an Axios client, which is just a wrapper for fetch calls essentially. Let's see here. So this is Next.js. This is our framework that we're using for the front end. It's a React framework focused on server-side rendering and static site generation. React obviously is the JavaScript framework that we're using. Redux Saga, don't worry about this because we're gonna be removing that probably within the next week. And of course, TypeScript. And hopefully I'm not missing anything here. We also use ESLint just for code formatting. So this is now a Next.js project. So how Next.js projects work is in the base directory, there's this pages folder. And what this essentially is, I guess I should get this running so I can demo it at the same time. Everyone's familiar for the most part with like the platform itself, right? Educator itself. I'll take that as a yes. Okay. Okay, so while that's getting up and running. So the pages directory essentially is exactly what it sounds like. The simplest examples we could see are like, here's the 404 page, which is in pages. These are our, static documents that we have. So for example, the FERPA is privacy is a better example. Privacy kind of has our whole privacy notice listed here. And this is kind of where we get started. So index.tsx is the landing page of our application. So when you go to the assigned domain, which is educator.app, it'll lead you to index.tsx. And how the pages directory works in Next.js is that anything in these subdirectories are actually routes. So you could see this code folder under pages. Anything, if we go to educator.app/code, that'll be these right here. And so /code will lead you to index.tsx. And if you include a dynamic problem ID after that code, it'll route to this page, this is called slug. And it's the same thing for the learn. So if someone's doing a lesson, we're gonna go to this page. And if someone's doing a problem, the application is gonna go to this page. This is the same thing, the admin side of things. So this would be educator.app/admin/content/create. And then the module ID would be contained after that. Same thing with login, modules, problems, stuff like that. Is there any questions about the pages directory? It's still loading up, so it might become a little bit more clear once I can show the page, but.
So just to give everybody some more context, Dustin is on a new branch that's called Next Migration. This is not the main branch because they were migrating all the code base like over the last 2 months or so. This is finally done. So you guys will be working on this branch, which is the new version of the code base this semester. Does that make sense? Okay. Cool.
Yeah. Also, I forgot to mention app.tsx is the wrapper for everything in the project. So you can see here we're wrapping basically every single page in all of these components. So our provider is connected to Redux, which is a global state management library. And for those that aren't familiar with that, it's basically a way to keep variables on a global scale so you can access them from any component within the DOM tree. We have a styled engine provider, which this is just needed for material UI. We wrap the whole project in something that basically gives it a styling context. Same thing with theme provider. Toaster is for notifications. So those little notifications that pop in from the top that say error or success or loading, those are all called toasts. And that's what we're using this library called React Hot Toast for. And finally, there's just everything is wrapping this component. And these components are pages essentially. And now that this is loaded up, just for clarity. So this in production is educator.app, but if we went to /code, once it loads. So this page right here is exactly what I showed in here. So if you go to pages /code/nothing, then it goes to the index page within that directory. And this is what you see. So like this is the little crocodile on that page. Okay, so I think that covers pages. Again, feel free to send a message or interrupt me if there's any questions. Okay, so I guess we can talk about data fetching. So data fetching is all done client side on our project. So I guess a good example here is the coding page. So for problem ID, for example, so go here and click on a problem. You can see up in the URL, it'll append once it loads. This problem ID to the end of the URL. And essentially what that's doing behind the scenes is Next.js is routing to this problem ID.tsx file. Once we're in that file, here's what we're doing here. So we have this thing called a custom hook in React. And this is essentially grabbing all the data from the backend, which Marc is going to go over soon, but we're grabbing the current problem and the standard in and the standard input and an error in case we run into an error and the status of the fetch call. And all of these hooks, there's one for getting lessons, there's one for getting problems, there's one for running code, there's one for submitting code. All of that is all contained within the hooks folder. So you can see this is use fetch lesson. This is when we're talking about use fetch problem. Basically, we're just calling this fetch function with API client, which is an Axios instance, which is what I mentioned earlier. There's a couple other stuff in the weeds, but I don't think we have to worry about this too much. And once that data is returned, then we're returning it from the hook, which is then fetched within the page, and it's referenced within the file. So all throughout here. So that's how we're doing data fetching for practically everything. So we can go through the library. So in the library, we have 4 different folders. One is for the API. That's what I was talking about, Axios. One is for the authentication. This is kind of a work in progress right now. This is just types, it looks like. And this is where all the Redux stuff is stored. So Marc, could you like give a little explanation of Redux? I feel like I couldn't really like for the slices.
Yeah, I can give a high level overview of just Redux in general. I think I have the client running, so I can show that too. Okay. Let me just load the page. Okay, share screen. Entire screen. Right, can everyone see my screen? Okay, cool. So we go to root reducer. Redux, if you, in its simplest form, is just a big JavaScript object that holds your global state. The way that React works is that there are multiple components and sometimes you can't hold your state. You want to share state between components, so you need some sort of outside model where it holds all global state, and that way you can fetch it, grab it, this in-state stuff in any of your components. So that's what Redux is for. And if you'll look at root reducer, I don't know where it is in the old migration. I'm pretty sure it's in like /store/something, but it should look like somewhat like this. You'll see this thing called root reducer. Think of that as just like a big object. This is what the object looks like. If we think about it, it's, let's call it state, and then login, modules, account manager, all these keys are keys to X state. So login slice.reducer, that holds the state plus the functions that are needed to update the login state. Modules reducer is the key that holds the objects that hold the modules state plus functions that will update it. So a good, I think an easy one to look over is, let's see, if we go to start code, or even not even, we could just go back to localhost landing page.
It's just index.
Oh yeah, I forgot we changed. We changed it, so now we have to go this way. Pages code. Okay, so I want to find a place that we actually use Redux. Okay, is it in playground? Playground. Okay. Use states. Use router. Let's just go to modules. Next, modules. Okay. So let's see if the status is here. I'm working on this right now. So you'll see everywhere in our code things like use dispatch and use selector. These are the two components that you'll need for updating global state and just getting global state from Redux. These are just packages in React Redux, and anywhere in your components, all you have to do to grab set state is to grab set. So to just get state is call this use selector hook. Have a function that grabs a state object and what key you want. So state.login is the login state. And if you have Visual Studio Code, it's nice to look at actually what the root state is. So if you hover over what root state is, it gives you the key, login state, module state, account manager, problem editor, container, et cetera, et cetera. Make sense so far? All right. So for each key, it has a slice. So a slice, if we look at a slice is just holds your state and the functions that reduce it. And reduce just means update the state. In JavaScript, reducers are immutable, or getting state, you have to, state is immutable. So if you want to change state, just change the whole JSON object completely. You don't want to handle it in state because then you get some side effects, and it's just better to just copy the big object because it's in a front-end app. You won't hold so much state that copying one whole state isn't a big computation. So it's just better to create it, create a new state, and you'll see that here. So just going over a slice folder, going back, each key, so like login has its own state object that has state plus the functions that update it. So for login, let's just look at this login state. The default state it has, you'll see at the top, it'll say something like initial auth state or get initial, etc., etc. That is the state, initial state that it has. So for login slice, I think this might be an old branch, but for login slice, is loading is false, error message is empty, logged in is false, and the role of the user starts out as a TA. So each object, if we think about the state of the state of the root object, if we try to get state, so const state right now looks like this: login is loading, error message, logged in, role, etc., etc. And the way to grab it is just call use selector state, and then call state.login. Whatever you need, and that will get the most updated value of the state. Makes sense so far? Any questions about how to just grab state in general?
I think Vida had a question, Mark.
Okay.
So why do we want to do it this way with slices? Why is this way better than another way potentially that we could just have the states, or maybe even just have one state that's constantly updated? Why do we want it like this?
So the one state that we have it so far is to put it in slices, just because, you know, if we have one big thing, it's hard to look at, what does this state object map to? So we have we wanted to put it in chunks. So anything that has to do with modules goes into this key in this big map. Accounts are in account manager, which goes into this big map. So anything that you need for said stuff, key for it. But you know, that could be something to change. Do we want to change it to something? Do we want to refactor it to just one big whole state? And what are like the advantages of that? Is that better? What value add does it have? And definitely looking for improvements to the app. So, you know, if you have a suggestion on what we should change, I'm definitely open to hear for it. This was more at the time, just for background, the way we wanted to structure this app was model view controller. So everything was in the view. We have everything has a model, everything has a controller. So everything is incrementalized. So login has its own thing, modules has its own thing, and everyone works separately. Like there was one person working on the login page, one person working on the accounts page, et cetera, et cetera. So it was easy to not have stuff conflicting and things having things in its own place.
Yeah, and just to add to that, a lot of the design decisions, especially during this migration, are for, you know, code composability and also just like developer ease of development. In my head, like if we were to just make one huge global state object, it would just, you know, whenever we need to store something else in the global state as we scale, we'll just need to add it to that object. And, you know, there's kind of no end to that. Whereas if you made a new slice, it kind of becomes more composable and more accessible and less of a nightmare to maintain. I think the reason why we split it up is because, you know, if one developer is just focused on improving something within the login functionality, but they have to dig through all of the content editor functionality as well, which has no relation to their current task, it's just it'll, you know, it's extra time that they need to develop. There's a risk of like messing up something completely unrelated, you know, so it's more for the developer more than the end user.
Yeah, and looking at like the login slice especially, if you see this reducer, if we have this reducer only affects that key state. So if I return in JavaScript, this is how to like copy state. What happens is, for example, request login. When someone calls this reducer or this dispatch function, what happens is it makes a copy of just the login state and nothing else. So content editor modules are untouched and we don't have any like big side effects. It will just copy this and append these new, or append / replace these new keys. So before the function, the value was is loading is false. Now it's is loading is true and error message is still empty. So these types of dispatch functions and putting them in little subtrees allows you to just update that set state and not affect anything else.
Interesting. More so, I was just asking out of curiosity. Most of my experiences with smaller websites, and they don't really deal with the state that much. So I've only ever seen it where it's one big state, but that makes a lot of sense. It's much more modular this way and easier to handle. So it seems like a pretty good decision.
It's also not a long-term decision either. We could definitely scrap this. Like just for context, Dustin and I talked about moving a lot of, that's the reason why we did the migration. Dustin's like, this is frustrating to develop. What can we do to change? A lot of people are on Next.js now. React app is in the maintenance state. It's still like really, it's developed by Facebook, so it's going to be there forever. But you know, there's a lot of documentation around Next.js, a lot of, you know, just community around it, and it's newer. And there's also just a lot of advantages about how the pages are laid out as well. Before we had something called React Router, where we had custom routing, and there wasn't a website path slug to VS Code folder mapping. So you had to look deeply in the code to say, okay, this component actually goes to educator.app/code/whatever.
Yeah.
But now this goes to, but now you can actually check, oh, pages/whatever, pages/code/etc. This truly maps to that page. So it'll be easier for you to see. I mean, you could also get like tools like, you can get React app plugins on Chrome and etc. But just for users to start out like, oh my gosh, how do I know where X file is? You can look here, and then from there you can like kind of bisect and see, okay, problem ID matches here. These are all the components it uses. Oh my gosh, let's go to component/code editor view /etc. And I'll know like which component that we'll end up using. So far, I mean, this is the decision also that Dustin and I made. So you're also the test subjects for this the new way that this repo is handled. So if you have, you know, this is open source, everyone's opinions matter. And I would love to get to know, like, what do you think will make this app better? And how do you think, like, if there's any way that you think, okay, if this was this way, then I would love to, it would be easier for me to contribute. So, but yes, other than that, yeah.
Just one comment, Mark. Yeah, I think the new restructuring is really, really intuitive, 100 times better than the previous one. So good job on that. And I think Daniel also had one question on the chat, which was, can you show him how to call the function to get the state again?
Yes, if we go to, let's go to modules. So to call the state, you'll see, let's see, there's so many places where you call use selector. It's called use selector and use dispatch. So a good one I would say is any of these, but let's see what. So for instance, this one's used, this component uses the problem editor container state. So this selects it / maybe updates it. So you know that within problem editor, which is the admin side, which is in the admin side, you're editing a problem, it is selecting said state. So it is selecting the warning type. So use selector is just a hook, a React hook using React Redux, and you just pass in an anonymous function. So if you don't know what anonymous function is in JavaScript, please do. We use a lot of them here. So anonymous function is, as what it says, it's not a named function. It is just a function inline that you pass through. So if you've used Python, same thing as lambdas. Lambdas aren't really named. I guess you can name them, but same thing like lambda functions. You just pass in a function that grabs a state. So this one says, passing in the full big state, what do I want to grab? And technically you can get the full state. Like you can call use selector and grab state. And then from here, just do state dot, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then it becomes a little monotonous. So these use selectors are helpful for grabbing specific pieces of the state. To actually change states. Does that answer the question, by the way?
Yeah, thank you. So do we always use root state, or would that change throughout?
Yeah, like I mean, from the end, it all compiles into root state, right? So if we go to the store, if we go to the root reducer, this is the root state. You're basically, you're essentially grabbing all this.
Oh, okay.
And then from here, you just grab a piece of it, but each piece gets its own update. So login reducer only updates login. Modules reducer only updates module and doesn't know about any of these other states.
Okay, and then it would be state dot if you do problem editor container, and then you go inside that to
state dot problem, and then to see what the shape of the state is, like to see like what class, you just go into the actual reducer itself, and there will be took me to node modules, problem editor container state slice, and then and then you go to each slice file. So each slice file will have its own thing. So you'll see get problem editor initial state, and then this will be for anything that you need. The initial states are given. You'll always see a get X state, and that's how each state is grabbed. If you want a tutorial on just how the slices object are structured, we use a pretty common pattern in React Redux. We're using React Redux slices. It's like the newer way for Redux Toolkit, which is the hooks way of grabbing things. React hooks is has been the common way to a common design pattern in React for the past few years. So I recommend, if you have the time, to just look at just hooks in general. And if you're just interested in this, the why this is structured, I can send you the actual tutorial that we all use during our senior year. But yeah, so if you'll see, if we go to modules again, you'll see this use dispatch hook. Use dispatch just grabs, just is a global handler for dispatching events. So if you want to update part of a state, you use this dispatch. It's the same thing as a setter. Basically, it's a setter for a variable. If you'll see something called dispatch X. So this one, dispatch open create dialog. What happens is it makes a dispatch event that goes into React Redux land. All the internals of it, you kind of don't really care about. It just dispatches this event called open create dialog. This open create dialog, what it does, if we go to open create dialog, it copies the state and then passes this into that dialog. So in dialog state, it says opens true, action is dialog status create, et cetera, et cetera. So all these are created. And if you have a question like, oh, why isn't the Redux state why is there no documentation saying what the whole Redux state is? I started to do that. The reason I didn't create all of the Redux state and print it out is that it's a really big object. There's a lot of variables and it keeps changing all the time. So kind of the best way to go about looking at like, oh, what state should I grab is to go in each slice file. I'll have documentation on the Notion about how to like, just again, how to do this and how to make each slice file, how to update state and add your state. But if you're creating a component, basically all you need to do is kind of copy this pattern of have default state, have a function that gets the base state, and create your slice. A slice object, all you need is to give it a unique name, pass it initial state, and then have functions that update it. And that is it. So it's just a big way of get set.
Okay. I think I understand it now. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah. Any questions on this so far? No?
Mark, do we want to talk about how we're like, where to use global state and where to not?
Yeah, I can go on a little bit, but this is the front end side, so you have complete control. If you wanna talk about it, like design patterns and just like best practices in that app so far, like feel free.
Yeah, I mean, just real quick, like some things just don't require global state, right? Mm-hmm. In general, you should use global state for things that are happening in one component, and then somewhere up and to the left and to the right of the tree over here that also requires on the state that you change in that other component, right? If there's something like an input box or even something that can be passed down like a single level and nowhere else in the app depends on that, what you just changed or what you just ran or what you just altered, it's best to just encapsulate that data flow within the component itself. So I guess a good example here is this, right? So to add to what I just said, if you use global state for everything, if you have like a global state variable in that big massive object for everything that you're changing, you're kind of like polluting the app in a sense, where a lot of components that don't need access to that component are reading that component. And not only does that get maintainable, but or unmaintainable, just development wise, something changes and you don't know where it's changing. I don't know, it gets ugly and it can be like pretty non-performant. So just as an example here, this is what code editor view, this is the coding page like itself, like where you see the problem and you see the text input and then the results. This is that in the old version. And you can see all of these use selectors, get the file type, get the problem ID, get the nav structure, and these are all being changed in other components. And we can do that, and down here, ignore all the red lines, but wait, is this the right one? This is the right one, sorry. Here we go. So you can see, so we're getting the current problem via selector, the error message is loading problem. So as a design decision here, since we were only fetching this from this page itself and passing it or referencing it within this code editor view, which is this component, we decided that since nowhere else in the DOM tree needed access to those variables, we could just condense it down to this custom hook, which I was talking about. So there's no selectors in this function anymore. So it doesn't depend on Redux. Instead, we're just using this custom hook, which I talked about, to get the current problem and the error and the status just as we did before, except we just pass that directly into the code editor view with current problem and stdin. And so there are no like rules for where you should use which, but you know, I think a good rule of thumb is like, if you don't need global state, don't use it, because it just, I don't know, it just can get messy pretty fast. But yeah, so that's all I wanted to say about that. And also, for just real quick, if anyone like wants to learn more about like the custom hooks and how we're implementing these, I did write a Notion document, which I'll send in the chat right now. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, and Dustin made a good point. Again, this was written by students for students. So during our senior year of college, there were probably a lot of things were like, oh, we probably could have done it this way. We probably could have X done it this way. That is always happening. So if you see something like, oh my gosh, this is so not performant and it would be better if it was this way, please speak out. Please let us know. Yeah, and feel free to just create a PR if you think something is like, this is unnecessary, this isn't like the greatest way to do things. Like, I'm always feel free. Thanks again, Dustin, for mentioning that. I put in a link for custom hooks. Overall, so far, does that make sense for just how the code is structured? Any questions about front end? Front end's usually the one with the most components. It has the most dependencies. So there are a lot of documentation / things to look through. But my biggest advice is, don't look at all the dependencies and look at all their GitHub pages and look at all the APIs that they support and etc. Just look at the one that is most useful to you. So whatever's in your view, and I need XYZ, look at XYZ. Don't try to go in a rabbit hole of, oh my gosh, Material UI 5.x has this API that accepts XYZ inputs. Why don't we use this? Or there's this function in Material UI, I need to go look it up because I might use it. Don't do that. Just if you are working in the app, it's again a bigger code base. So you don't need to know everything to contribute everything, is my take. But yeah, if we have no questions on the front end side, I can go on the back end side if people are ready.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So backend side is a little bit more simpler, but just because of we don't rely on a lot of packages. So let me share my screen. Entire screen. Okay, awesome. So backend, if you look at the package.json file, dev dependencies are just things that you need to develop, like things that are in your development environment, but not actually your big dependencies that you need to use in the app. So the only things that you really need to worry about are in this dependencies object. We also use Axios here for just fetching. AWS SDK, you won't need to touch that. That was on a feature that we had prior, but we're not using anymore. So you don't need to look at AWS SDK. Bcrypt, that's for hashing, and that might go away, honestly, because we might be moving to OAuth for our logins. Quick architecture description right now. On the front end, we actually just use JWT tokens for login. So it's all password, username. We just hash the password like 10 times with a big key. It's not the greatest, but it works. So no one's hacked us yet. Please don't hack us. So right now, that is what we use, just username, password. We will move. That will be the next thing after this, is actually moving to more secure to more secure auth. So right now it is using decrypt. Cores is just actually, I don't even know why we used cores. It's just a cross origin resource sharing. And the whole time I've been here, I've never really understood why, but that is something that you need to use when also using localhost and getting your backend up and running. Express, that is the framework that we're using to store all these routes. Please look at Express.js. Ours is in TypeScript, so it's just Express.js on types. It's a web application framework. It's fast, unopinionated, minimalist, as they say. Really short. I think it's pretty simple to learn. It's also in JavaScript / TypeScript. So there's not going to be this weird, oh, I have to learn Go or I have to learn C++. It's all in the same language. HTTP status, that is a way to send, that is just a wrapper around sending HTTP status codes. 200 is okay, 500 is server error. Joy object ID, those are just validation. JSON web tokens, so JWT. Moment is for dates. So date handling is actually a big thing, and they needed to make a package for it. So dates are, moment is there. MongoDB memory server. So our app right now runs on MongoDB. Why did we choose NoSQL? We chose NoSQL because it was free, and it was also the database used at the time for software for our class software engineering. So everyone knew MongoDB, and I was like, okay, everyone knows MongoDB. I guess we'll just use MongoDB. So far, it has worked okay. Anytime you need to add another key to the table, anytime you need to add a property, it is nice to add things and not break things and not change the way that tables are. So if you ever need to like add another column, you can. Do you want to change this? Probably. I think like in the future when it's not free and we have to pay for stuff, like we want to change. There is a long-standing PR right now that actually changes all of it to SQL, because I don't know if software engineering still does MongoDB, and MongoDB is also very specialized, and it is a third party. And I feel like everyone who with a computer science education will know how to use SQL. And they've also changed the relational patterns as well. So it's pretty good. Mongoose, Multer, Passport JWT, so Passport and Passport JWT are for auth again. Multer, Mongoose is for MongoDB models. So that is one thing, is you have to define, MongoDB has a special way of defining data via models. So that is one thing is you'll have to learn, is looking at the MongoDB package and also looking at how their NoSQL database structure is set up. Super test, I don't think we use it too much, so don't worry about that. UUID, as it says, it's just a UID. And validator, it's good for validation of logic. But how this is structured, and I'll go over to on the repo how things are deployed and stuff in a second. We have an env file, a big env file that just exports a lot of keys. And you just, when in your environment, if you are on Windows, please use git bash. If you are Mac, Linux, it doesn't matter. All you need is to source the environment file. So I named mine here environment file. All the keys are set up. Run npm run dev, just like how you do it in the front end soon enough. And then it starts. So what this means is it starts a server at localhost 8080, and now you can actually make requests to this backend. In the backend, you'll see a few folders. The only thing that really matters is your environment file plus anything in SRC. Index is the root. If you see this, this is where it all starts. This is where the magic happens. It's just server.start. It is one class that holds routes, and you make requests to said route, and it will spit you back out something. If we go to actual server, you will see this class called server. And in this class called server, it does a few things. In the constructor, it connects to the database, it connects to the config, it establishes the routes. So what routes does and what these functions do, for routes, you have a router object that maps to functions. If I go to app.get/ as this route suggests, all it does is sends me an OK object. So I use Postman for doing this type of stuff, but if you want, you can also use it in browser. But Postman, side thought, Postman is a great way to test your backend routes. It is a great way to test things, make sure that works, make sure that whatever you get back from the backend is what you want. So for instance, right now I have my environment set up to pull from, this is in prod, let's go to dev. So this one is trying to grab from localhost 8080, which is where my backend is set up right now. So if I try to grab it, if I just do get request, it should pop me up an OK. Right? Make sense so far? Anytime you basically make a request to the route, find the route. So this one is just slash, and find the function that it does. Find the function that it maps to. So for this one, it just sends you OK. Now, if I go to /v1, if you see this, you'll see something called /v1. That is the v1 of our backend. V1 has been there for a long time because there's not been a lot of changes. But you'll see that it'll be /v1 module with non-hidden problems. You're going to look at that and be like, where do I find that? What does it even return? This one returns to you an array of all the problems. What do we use this route for? We use this route for we use this route for rendering the side nav. So you'll see the array of problems, all their modules, and this piece of backend basically gives us, again, the module name, what number it is, so what order it's in, the ID, how many problems it has. So this one's C++, suffix count, sum of two numbers. You'll see that here, and that's what we display to the user. Makes sense so far? Any questions? Nope. Awesome. In the code, you have the API layer, and in the API layer, there are routes, middlewares, controllers, and models. We'll go through each one. Just like in the front end, we want to modularize routes. So there's an auth route, a code route, a health route, a lesson route, a problem route, each route that specifies what that route does. So this auth route is just meant for authentication. So /v1/login is the authentication controller. Code.route is for submitting your code. Health.route is for /health. So for each route, if we go back to index, everything, or actually server, everything starts out with v1, and then it uses this routes folder. So if you want to find a route, just follow the path /v1, go to the routes. Oh, I did definition, not type definition. Go to definition, and then from route, you'll see /v1/health /v1/module. If I try to go to /v1/health and I do a get, let me go to health router / get health. What should it return me? It should just return me okay. So assuming that it works, it will send me okay. Now, what if we want to work with something? What if we want to get the backend right? Not backend. What if we want to get stuff from MongoDB? That's what this server does, right? It just grabs stuff from MongoDB, and it also runs your code submissions based on what's in MongoDB. So if we want to grab code, or not code, but the problems, lessons, and all the modules, there's a module router. So one route is get v1/module/ with non-hidden problems. And from here, if we go to non-hidden problems, you'll see a few things. You'll see something called authenticate JWT. That's a middleware. Middlewares in code just mean there's an input, output, and there's something in between that says, can you go through? Do I want to validate you? Do I want to authenticate you? That is what middlewares are for. So if you see the middleware folder, those are middlewares for processing input before they go to the next function. If you think about the router, you'll have get, and you can add multiple middlewares as much as you want. Middleware 2, 3, 4, etc. before it goes to said function. But in this case, the only one is authenticate JWT. For a big problem like with problems, you'll see a few things. You'll have these interfaces, which are just types for getting the model. So you'll see something called models, and models are just the shapes of the object that you're trying to get from the database. So if you look at module.model, module.model defines a schema for you. So for instance, name is a type string, and it has to be required. It has a number, which is the sort order. So type is number, required is true, and there's setters for it. So these are ways to define your model, and how you define a model is using Mongoose. So if you want to learn more about Mongoose, just look up how do I define a schema in Mongoose in Google, and this is the package that we'll use. Now, I'll write some more documentation on this. I'll try to give out some tutorials as well for people for anyone's interested. Because I think I had to give a few tutorials as well to the other senior project team before we started. So I'll send those out for how to use them if you're interested, and if you're working on it. If you're not working on this, you can if you're interested, but like if you just want to get stuff done, no need to. Makes sense so far. Any questions?
Mark, just a quick question. So for those of who are working on the lessons, which is the content lessons, do you think MongoDB would be like our current plan would be able to support, like, let's say we develop a lot of lessons? Do you think we are at risk of going out of the current plan? Do you have any comments on that?
Oh, going out of the current plan for MongoDB?
Yeah.
We can check. We can check on the plan, but I don't I don't think so. It's
Okay.
all about requests. As when we scale, we're gonna have to change, right?
see.
We're gonna have to change this, but this is what we had so far as like a prototype, and it's been working so far with 500 plus students making requests. So right now it is free, it is nice, but yes, we will need to change at some point, right?
Okay.
So
yeah,
it is one of those, it is a code debt, like thinking about it, like we used what was free, and at the time, like it, you know, it works nice with one class, and if there is a night, and I think like one night before when a hard question was due, even at the most we had like 30-40%
bandwidth.
yeah, bandwidth. So it is
okay. Thanks.
we should be fine. It is, but we will need to change in the later future when yeah.
Thanks.
So one thing I'll say is if you're just creating lessons, not a problem, you won't need to change anything. But think hard too about if you are adding something like another model, make sure that we can do, if we end up switching somewhere, that we can, that's not so tightly coupled with MongoDB that the only way we can have this model is with MongoDB. I don't foresee that happening because NoSQL is, we can have NoSQL everywhere. There's a lot of NoSQL packages, like there, like AWS has one, Microsoft has one, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think that'll be a problem. But if we change to like SQL, that could also change. So yeah, just think about this, think about that. But overall, if you have questions about the routes, please let me know. All you have to do is define your route, make a post, get, put, or delete call, depending on what you need. Put is made for updating something in the DB, just in simple terms. Post, you're creating something or adding something. Delete is, again, you're deleting something. So based on that route, API design is a big thing too. Creating great APIs, create well-designed ones. You want to make sure that it makes the most sense. So when you define a route, try to think to yourself, like, why, what does this route make sense? And if you look at some of our code and like, okay, this doesn't make sense, that is probably true. Like you'll probably look at some of the like routes and say like, okay, maybe this could have been changed, et cetera, to X route. And feel free again to, you know, have an opinion about that and share that and see what we can to make it better. Because again, this is V1 and that's why we're always iterating. But yeah, any thoughts, questions? Because I think the last part is I'll go through development workflow. No? Okay, awesome. So in the development workflow, everything will be, for at least for the front end, everything will go through development. You're just going to make a branch off of main or development, doesn't really matter. And from there, you'll make a pull request. Once you make a pull request, you'll have, it should be the branch that you created. So if you worked with Git, you make branches, you make changes to those branches. And then from here, this is the base. So you want main, and then you want it to compare with, let's just say like this person's CI/CD deployment. This one can't automatically merge, but basically you make a pull request and whatever changes you have, it will show here. Let's see, I'll do one with something that is, let's see, this one, on click edit transition. Oh, someone already made a pull request. Okay, Benny. So Benny already created a pull request. So when we go to this pull request, this person, Benny, has made some changes, made some commits, and you can see what comments people have made. Basically, pull request will just allow us to, you know, look at your changes, comment on them. If you have any things that you need to change, just push to your branch and we'll see and update it here. This is where we also validate your branch and see if it's good enough to actually push to main. All in all, once your changes are validated, so for instance, let's say I do accept Benny's pull request, you need 2 approvers. Usually that's either me, Dustin, or Professor Mon, or that could be just all of you. What will happen is in the pull request, before you can even approve it, it needs to pass through Sonar Cloud and also checks. So if you want to learn about CI/CD, we can talk about that another time. I've set that up. So there's a continuous integration and code scanning that we do. So it runs tests, runs linters, runs all that nice fancy stuff, and just to make sure that your code works and runs. And then once all these pass, then we can approve. And once it approves, once 2 people approve, we can squash and merge. And then it will make this GitHub action that runs through the pipeline, runs through the continuous integration pipeline, and deploys it to AWS. So small architecture, front end is just static files hosted on an S3 bucket. Backend is hosted also on AWS in Elastic Beanstalk. We have CI files that just test, run, and deploy. And if you're interested in wanting to know how that works, let me know. We can talk about it another time, but that's just the workflow. Make a pull request, make your changes, and look at comments as well, because I'll probably be commenting on your pull requests. I think Blake added something here. Like I'll probably approve yours. Like this one, I commented on yours. I think Professor Amano already talked to you about it, but yeah, I'll probably other request changes. Okay, yeah, so I'll probably approve and push this. So just for these, just again, I'll comment. Someone will comment. You make your changes. Once you agree all together, then we can push, and that will. I'll make a branch called development. And in that development branch, I'll make like a side deployment for you all so that you can iterate and deploy faster. So that way you're like, while students are doing their thing, if something breaks on your side, like it won't affect them. We'll have a development branch. I don't think we had that at the start because we were just like push to main. But now it probably should be good that we have side branches before we actually push to main. But yeah, any questions on how to contribute? No? All right, awesome. If you have any questions or you were just afraid to ask a question, that I get that too. Please just ask on the Discord. Please ask me. Please let me know. My working hours are like 9 to 5 Pacific time, but I'll probably I can probably give me like an hour or two, and I usually answer within then. So, you know, during my lunchtime. So feel free to ask me too.
Anybody has any more questions for Dustin or Mark, I guess?
I have to make a bus, so I have to leave soon.
Oh, yeah. Right. Thanks, guys.
Nice meeting
you. Thanks, everybody, for meeting this late. And again, both Mark and Dustin are going to be on Discord. If you guys have any questions and you need any advice, feel free to reach out to them or me, and we can take it from there. Okay, and thanks for contributing to the project. Thanks, Mark and Dustin, for your time on this. This is very helpful. I'm going to stop recording now. Have a great time. Take care, guys.